You're watching Raising Healthy and Natural Children in a Toxic World by Dr. Lisa Gall on Resonance Wellness TV, part of our Nurture Natural Care series that seeks to inspire and educate about natural health and holistic family life. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation about raising healthy and natural children in a toxic world. And if we have not met, my name is Dr. Lisa Gall, and I'm a naturopathic doctor in Calgary. He's been helping moms keep their kids healthy the natural way since 1998. I'm also a trained anthroposophic physician, and for those of you familiar with Waldorf, I apply this very important approach in my practice. Our lecture tonight comes out of the Nurture Natural Care series from Helping Dr. Mom. So for many years, I did this in-person courses with parents on weekends about natural health and the philosophy of parenthood. But of course, nowadays everybody's online. And so many of those courses have made the switch too. So on helpingdrmom.com, you can see the parent-oriented lectures on the events page and courses on the courses page. And I really enjoy supporting people who are motivated to improve their understanding of holistic health and to help you and your children or grandchildren reach optimal levels of health by learning holistic care and treatments that really ultimately benefit you both in the long run. So I wanted to start out by talking about how toxic can a baby actually be? And the answer to this question is quite surprising, honestly. Because as an example, there was a study that was spearheaded by the Environmental Working Group. So they had researchers at two major laboratories looking at umbilical cord blood. So for those of you who don't realize this, you can bank umbilical cord blood after your child's birth on the off chance that they get something that they're going to require stem cells for. And so you can opt when you give birth to put that in storage. So the Environmental Working Group actually tested cord blood from 10 babies born in 2004 in US hospitals. And those tests revealed a total of 287 chemicals. So the umbilical cord blood had pesticides in it, consumer product ingredients, wastes from burning coal, gasoline, and garbage. So that study represented the first reported cord blood tests for 261 of those 287 targeted chemicals, and the first reported detections in cord blood for 209 of those compounds. So some of those were 8 perfluorochemicals used as stain and oil repellents in fast food packaging, clothes, and textiles, including the Teflon chemical PFOA, which was characterized and is characterized as a likely human carcinogen. Dozens of widely used brominated flame retardants and their toxic byproducts, and numerous pesticides. So of the 287 chemicals that were detected, we know that 180 of those cause cancer in humans or animals, 217 are toxic to the brain and nervous system, and 208 cause birth defects or abnormal development in animal tests. So this was this had never been studied before. The pre or postnatal exposure to like a huge mix of carcinogens and developmental toxins and neurotoxins had never been studied prior to that. So if some of these terms are new to you, I did already do a webinar on the whole life medicine side called Environmental Toxins and Health and that's on the Alleviate Replays page on the whole-life-medicine.com site. So you can also check that out and understand the toxins themselves further. But I think it's an astonishing awareness to understand just how many of these compounds are ending up in our children. Now, to a degree, that is somewhat normal in a pregnancy, that a mother's toxic load is going to end up in their baby. Now, ideally, there wouldn't be any toxins at all. But what we do know is that in pregnancy, you kind of use your child in a way a bit like a sink for extra compounds. And so babies are being born with pesticides that were banned decades before they were ever conceived or born. So, because many of those things are very biopersistent, and that does argue the fact of doing detoxification quite a bit prior to achieving a pregnancy. So, it's an important consideration in nowadays infertility as well. Now, having the fetal exposure causes disease in future generations. So, remarkably, it does appear that early life exposures can directly lead to health problems, not just in adulthood, but also through subsequent generations. So, for instance, an adult disease linked to newborn's low birth weight can cause adverse effects not only in the babies born small, but also in their children of any birth size through inheritable changes in gene expression that resulting in a phenomenon that's known as epigenetic inheritance. So this is very different from genetic mutations, which are physical changes in a gene structure. Epigenetic inheritance is instead characterized by certain genes being turned on or off, but often near permanently in ways that can be inherited. So if you change something by mutation, it's kind of like changing a light fixture, and the comparable epigenetic change would be like taping the light switch on or off. So since genes are responsible for making the chemicals that build and repair your body, if you are forcing a permanent on or off position epigenetically, that can have a far-reaching consequence. So in theory, you still have the gene, but it's not operational. Or sometimes you have a gene that's been permanently turned on that's actually has adverse outcomes. It might be building something that you don't actually want a ton of long term. So in humans, both kinds of those genetic changes, mutations as well as epigenetic changes, can be passed down to a baby in the womb. And a lot of this has to do with, I'm going to just show you a number of ways that you can make modulations epigenetically. So here's a whole group. Now we're only going to talk today predominantly about toxic chemicals, but there are quite a range of different things that can have an influence on what your genes express, both for positive and for negative, right? So your diet can have a positive or negative effect, and exercise can have a positive or negative effect. What disease exposures you have can actually change how your genes are expressed. Toxic chemicals, like we've already spoken about and are going to speak about today. Drugs of abuse. How socioeconomically well off you are can have a big impact. Seasonal correlations and day-night correlations can have an impact on what's happening in your genes. And your psychological state can have a bearing. Drugs that you're taking that are prescribed for you, alternative medicines, social interactions, and the health of your microbiome. So there are many influences on not your actual gene structures, but on how those genes express themselves. So one of the most important methods for having an impact on epigenetic expression, so this is whether or not the light switches are on and off, is your diet. So besides antioxidants, which many people have heard about, fruits and vegetables contain innumerable phytonutrients that can directly modulate gene expression and even modulate DNA repair pathways. And until fairly recently, it was generally assumed that functions as important as DNA repair would not be readily affected by nutrition. But if you compare in studies identical twins to fraternal twins, so identical is like exactly like they're twins that are exactly identical. Fraternal twins have separate eggs. So an identical twin is one egg that divides into two identically looking people. A fraternal twin is two eggs got fertilized at the same time. So if you look at the at twin studies, you can see that about half to 3/4 of DNA repair function is genetically determined, but you can probably control the rest. So that's up to half of your repair mechanisms. So it's estimated that on average, there's 800 incidents of DNA damage in your body per hour. That's about 19,000 damaging pieces on our DNA every day. And really, those kinds of mutations eventually can give rise to various conditions like cancer if you don't repair them. But thankfully, the regulation of DNA repair is really influenced by what we eat. And specifically, that might actually constitute part of the explanation for why certain foods are cancer preventative or arthritis preventative, is that you're actually having an interaction with the DNA. So, are there any plants in particular? There's lots of obviously plants out there. Only certain ones have been tested. So some of the ones that were highest probably at DNA repair out of like one study I looked at were lemons, persimmons, strawberries, broccoli, celery, apples. All of those conferred DNA protection at pretty low doses as dietary elements. So lemons, for example, were found to cut DNA damage by about a third. So it wasn't the vitamin C. It's if you remove the vitamin C from the lemon extract, that did not remove that protective effect. But if you boiled your lemon for 30 minutes, the protective effect was lost. Now, most of us don't boil our lemons, but all that they're trying to prove in this study is that there's something in there, biological in nature, which is clearly having an effect on the DNA repairs. Now, I also want to take a look at this diagram here. What this is showing is it's a kind of summary of liver detoxification pathways and supportive nutrients. So besides epigenetic influences, nutrition has a major impact on the ability to directly detoxify. And of course, avoiding external toxins is a very good idea. We've talked about this in previous lectures. And you always also generate toxins from within. So from the normal processes that you do on a daily basis, from your microbiome, which is the collection of organisms that you live with. We've also talked about this before in previous lectures. But once you have those toxins, you're going to run them through chemical modifications to make them into a form that you can excrete. So you can see on the top bar here that it says toxins in the upper left corner. So these are endotoxins, things that you're basically making from within your body, and exotoxins, things that you're going to pick up either through inhalation or eating something, things that you take internally on purpose, how you clean your house with different kinds of chemicals, off-gassing of furniture, all those other things that are coming from the external world. So you have these toxins, and you do a couple of phases of detoxification with them. The first is that you, in phase 1 here of detoxification, you use a set of enzymes predominantly in your liver, and this is the reason why there's the liver painted underneath this diagram. So you use a set of enzymes, they're called cytochrome P450 enzymes, and lots of people have kind of heard that, but maybe don't know what that is. So this is just basically a set of phase 1 detox enzymes, and the goal of these enzymes is to usually create a more active intermediary substance. So you can take a toxin and you're going to actually prepare it by starting to do a couple of processes to it. And phase 1 processes usually make toxins slightly more active or more open to getting something bound to them that will make them soluble in bile. So in phase 1 here, you can see there's a bunch of nutrients showing up. You're seeing branched chain amino acids, flavonoids, folic acid, glutathione, phospholipids, and a set of vitamins. So branched chain amino acids are a group of amino acids like valine and acylvaline. So these are a particular type of amino acid that you would get in proteins that you eat. Now, ideally, you digest a whole bunch of these things in your meals and you take them into your liver, and they are the substrates for when you're doing your detox processes. Flavonoids are plant molecules that one of the highest sources of flavonoids is something like parsley, as an example. These are compounds directly coming out of plants, and they are needed in phase 1 detoxification. Folic acid, also a major plant constituent in fruits and vegetables, also needed here. Glutathione. Some of the highest sources of glutathione, and people have heard of glutathione probably in recent years. The highest sources are things like asparagus, avocados, green beans, cucumbers, spinaches. It's also going to be found in things like, pretty much most green things. And then there is phospholipids. So phospholipids are a type of fat, and they are predominantly found in eggs, organ meats, lean meats, fish, shellfish, a little bit in cereal grains and oil seeds. And there's like a whole mix of different kinds of phospholipids that you actually need here. And then vitamins B2, 3, 6, and 12. So B12 is possible to get vegetarian, obviously, but mostly that's coming from meat unless you're taking a supplement or an algae supplement. B2 comes from things like mushrooms or spinach, and then animal foods. B3 comes from liver, chicken, turkey, salmon, tuna, but also spirulina. And B6, again, meats, fish. Greens are there, but way down. So you're needing this huge range of food molecules from different things, but a lot of them are coming from plant foods. Now you can see that you're going into intermediary metabolites next after phase 1. So you're basically transporting molecules sometimes all the way through these procedures, or sometimes they'll only undergo one procedure and then be excreted. But usually you go through phase 1, you become an intermediary metabolite, and then you need to actually change those reactive sites you made with phase 1, and you need a whole other range of nutrients to do that performance now. So you can see here there's vitamin C, there's bioflavonoids, which is another kind of flavonoid, and those are high in things like horse chestnut. There's a lot of like herbs that are super high in bioflavonoids. Any colored compounds, like the carotenes here as well, are like yellow, orange, green leafy fruits and vegetables. And generally, the more intense a color of a fruit or vegetable, the more beta carotene that it has and the more bioflavonoids that it has. Copper, manganese, pycnogenol. So that's comes from pine trees, peanut skins, and grape seeds, and green or black tea to get pycnogenol. Selenium comes from Brazil nuts and meats and things like that, fishes. Tocopherols, which are things that are vitamin E related. They come in things like wheat germ and sunflowers. So you can see there's just a huge range of needed requirements. And even when you go to phase 2 and you're conjugating, so you're actually adding the molecule onto the active site that's going to literally make it water soluble and get excreted from your body, there's a whole other list of nutrients here needed. And these are mostly modified amino acids. So cysteine, glutamine, glycine, methionine, N-acetylcysteine or NAC, and taurine. So you can just see very nutrient intense to do detoxification, and many of these compounds are really only found richly in fruits and vegetables. Now, the last step there is excretory derivatives. So once you have a compound that can be excreted, it's going to go out through the bile from your liver into the feces and out through the stool, but it can also be circulated through the serum and be dumped out of the kidneys as urine. You may also get some of these compounds breathed out. You may also sweat some of them out. So there's more than one way to excrete, but I want you to get the point that this is a very nutrient intense function. There is nothing that is easier than eating well for detoxification, and especially in children when you have limited options for, creating more forcible detoxification procedures. Food is crucial to the process of detoxification. So setting up a child's nutrition is always something to really consider from early on. Infant nutrition is really best supported early on by breastfeeding, and ideally until 2 years old. So if you don't breastfeed or didn't have the chance to breastfeed, that's associated with an increased incidence of infections, such as like middle ear infections, gastroenteritis, pneumonia. It elevates the risk of childhood obesity, type 1 and type 2 diabetes, leukemia, and SIDS. If you have a premature infant, not receiving breast milk is also associated with something called necrotizing enterocolitis, which is where the inside of the colon is very severely damaged. So babies who are exclusively breastfed are 14 times less likely overall to die than babies who are not breastfed. But what's amazing is that only about 41% of infants up to 6 months old are exclusively breastfed. That is not a great number. Part of this happens because there's inappropriate marketing of breast milk, quote unquote, substitutes that undermine efforts to improve breastfeeding, and the COVID-19 crisis certainly intensified that. In Canada, about 81.9% of children had been breastfed at all. 63% make it to 3 months, but probably beyond 3 months, especially those women who are younger, only about under about the age of 25, only about 49% of them still breastfed after 3 months. It turns out if you're older or have more education, you're more likely to do that. 75% of moms 35 years or older breastfeed beyond 3 months. And there's lots of reasons why people don't breastfeed, but there certainly is a lot of nutrition misinformation about breastfeeding versus like formula feeding and other kinds of infant feeding that are shockingly false, and people just believe it. Introducing foods to children really early on is not a substitute for breast milk. It's extremely difficult to meet the nutritional needs of an infant actually without breast milk. We can try, but we don't actually do the best jobs. And so exposures in utero even actually influence taste and flavor preferences. So what moms eat during pregnancy influences the flavors the fetus is exposed to in the amniotic sac. And in one study, women were randomized to eat garlic capsules or placebo. So the smell of garlic is pretty easily detected in the fluid of the women who'd eaten garlic, but not in those who had not. They actually did amniocentesis to check for how much garlic made it in there. What they noted is that fetal swallowing frequencies, so fetuses in the womb swallow when they're exposed to sweet solutions in the amniotic fluid, and then the swallowing frequency decreases if they're exposed to bitter solutions. And you can see really similar behaviors to this observed within hours of birth. So newborn infants will like kind of begin to orient and begin mouthing. So that's like where they kind of open their mouth, they're looking for their food source when they're exposed to garlic or anise if their mothers had consumed either during pregnancy. So they're already kind of primed for things. So if you have a pregnancy where you don't get to eat a whole heck of a lot of things because you're not doing very well, that actually has a big impact on what happens to your child's taste preferences. So they have long-lasting effects. So I think they did one study in Ireland where Irish mothers were randomized to eat like 4 meals a week having fresh garlic or to not eat any. And 8 years later, their children were given a taste test containing garlic potatoes and one that didn't have garlic in it. And remarkably, the kids whose mothers ate garlic during the last month of pregnancy ate twice as much of the garlic containing potatoes as did the control group. So also the same way, what a mother eats and drinks while she's nursing influences the flavor of breast milk. And those experiences also appear to influence infant acceptance of new flavors and what flavors will they accept and like later in life. There's also a time during the first several months of life when kids are most receptive to a wide diversity of flavors. So what they taste during that period can really influence their taste preferences later in life. Um, Beyond 6 months, if an infant has never been exposed to like a casein formula, so that's a cow milk protein formula, they usually refuse to drink them. But if you give them earlier on, they will tolerate them usually. So if you do give your infants formulas in the very first months of life, a lot of the time later on, they're more willing to eat savory or sour or bitter things than standard milk-based formulas, or kids who've never had formula. So it's really interesting to see that there's a lot of influences way before you ever think there was going to be on what kids are actually going to eat or not. So just another little thing I wanted to show is that this is a beautiful diagram that's basically showing you what's in formula and what's in breast milk. And at the end of the day, there is absolutely no comparison to all the different things that are actually present in breast milk versus formula. So this is not to make anybody feel bad. There's times and places where people can't breastfeed, but breast milk has such an incredible amount of amazing properties to it. One of the biggest things that happens as a consequence of breast milk is that a lot of the compounds in breast milk really have a big impact on how a child's microflora is being established. And in fact, a lot of the compounds that come in human milk are not even nutritional compounds for the infant. They're nutritional compounds for your microbiome. So this has implications, of course, if women have had antibiotics in the later stages of pregnancy, like say if they were strep positive or whatever, that can have a big impact on a baby's early microbiome, especially if they're not breastfed. However, after we're done with breastfeeding, water should be the primary beverage. So kids should probably drink water probably almost exclusively after 4 years old. And around 6 months, I mean, babies can be introduced to water. They don't need very much of it, maybe a 4, maybe to 8 ounces when they're about a year old. The rest of their liquids are going to be coming from breast milk, ideally, or I guess formula if they're formula fed. So to stay well hydrated, a child between the age of 1 and 3 would probably need about 4 cups of beverages per day. And that's going to increase in older kids to around 5 cups by the time you're getting, closer to 8. And then as you get older, 7 to 8 cups for older children. I mean, of course, those amounts are going to vary by individual, and it depends on your humidity and levels of activity and how much heat there is outside. But it is really crucial to help your family choose water. And water doesn't have to be boring. There's lots of ways to entice everybody in the family to drink that and stay hydrated throughout the day. And just being a good role model yourself is a great way to make water a part of your kids' routine and gets them in the habit of drinking water before they're thirsty. But, you can do things like infuse the water with lemons or berries or cucumber or mint. We put salt and lemon in our water in our household, and everybody loves that. We also have bitters, sometimes flavored bitters like rose hip bitters. And lots of the time it just creates a little bit more stimulation. You can also, of course, keep fruits and vegetables that are high in water handy. So things like cucumbers or zucchini, iceberg lettuce, celery, watermelon. There's some water-rich fruits and vegetables for sure. You can freeze fruit inside ice cubes. That kind of dresses it up a little bit, and that gets kids excited about having water. You can get them with their own special water bottles. It's always amazing how many water bottles we collected over the years, swirly straws and all of those other things. And you can also make your own popsicles with pureed fruit, with mostly water in them. So really, early milk and then water are really the drinks kids need. So don't believe all the hype surrounding all those other drinks marketing to kids, that they usually contain so much more sugar than kids need in a day. So you don't really want any sugar sweetened beverages for your children, especially if they're less than 2. And really, they should be limited for your older kids as much as possible. So sports drinks, juice cocktails, soda, lemonade. They just really discourage the habit of drinking plain water. And there's a lot of empty calories that gets added to that. Even 100% juice really should be strictly limited. Um, it contains some vitamins, obviously, but they're still high in sugar and high in calories and low in the fiber that you're finding in your whole fruit. Even if you have a Vitamix, you kind of like breaking it down and you're actually getting the fiber, that's a bit better. But, because of a sweet taste, if kids are offered juice all the time, it's really hard to get them to drink plain water. So, kids less than a year really shouldn't be drinking juice at all. And if they're 1 to 3, half a cup or day or less. I don't know if you guys remember this when you were younger, but I actually remember going to, and when we had juice as children at like a restaurant, there almost always were tiny glasses, like tiny, like as in 4-ounce glasses. They were so, so small. And really, you should think about it's not big gulp size back then, and it shouldn't be big gulp size now. Um, Flavored milk is not a great idea either, and neither is really artificially sweetened drinks. I mean, you can use things for like stevia. We don't have a lot of like long-term data on stevia. It's just basically an amino acid, but water is really the preferred beverage. Now, you can also have quite a bit too much of bad things for children. And I know there's newer food campaigns that are trying to target healthy eating habits, but there's still a lot of companies that specifically target kids with food that's totally loaded with added stuff. And that's obviously an ingredient that can lead to obesity. In fact, the fast food industry spends nearly $5 million a day marketing products high in those sugars and fats and salts, and really showing portion sizes that are completely disproportionate to a child's energy needs, also to an adult's, frankly. So increasingly, fast food companies are also using like tie-ins with movies, tie-ins with toys. And it's been shown that very young children exposed to persuasive ads develop food cravings for unhealthy things they have never even tasted. There was one research study that surveyed 500,000 kids from 31 countries in 2 age groups. One age group was 6 to 7, and the other one was 13 to 14. And in both groups, kids who ate fast food 3 times a week or more had increased risk of asthma, rhinitis, which is kind of the sniffles, and eczema. As much of a 39% increase in severe asthma risk for teens and 27% for younger kids. And wouldn't you know it, if they just ate 3 or more servings of good old fruit in a week, they could reduce the severity of those symptoms for all 3 conditions. That's pretty marked. And there was another study published that found that teenagers and kids actually consume far more calories in fast food and other restaurants than they do at home. So those numbers could be alarming. Eating out was associated with taking in as much as 160 extra calories a day for younger kids and as much as 310 calories daily for teens. So that's a serious overeat. And a lot of that food obviously consists of empty calories. So I know that, people try and make healthier food choices, but even reports on food policy and obesity from the University of Connecticut found that only 5% of baby and toddler snacks actually meet nutritious standards. 50% of baby food snacks and 83% of toddler food snacks contain added sweeteners. So this is probably a key factor as to why childhood obesity is on the rise. There's about 41 million children worldwide that are overweight to obese. That's a lot of fat babies. And so if, according to the American Heart Association, a child should consume no more than 3 to 6 teaspoons of sugar in a day, in added sugar, but the reality is many children are doubling or probably even tripling that recommendation. So as an example, a standard can of soda has 7 teaspoons of sugar in it. So basically that's already over the top. And there's so many children that, eat those sort of things. And not thinking much of it, right? Parents are busy and they sometimes make decisions that are fast, and then that's the kind of thing that their kids are getting. So, I did also want to talk a little bit about real foods versus processed foods. So a real food is existing in a natural state. So maybe it's been like cut without any chemical alteration. So like think of fruit or something canned without any added ingredients. But a processed food is something that's processed with refined or artificial ingredients that chemically alter the state of that food. So something like a chicken nugget would be a great example that I'm showing here. So it's pretty important to reduce the amount of refined foods that kids eat. So those things are like sugary drinks like we talked about, syrups and jams, chocolates, candy, potato chips, sauces, and salad dressings and gravies, ice cream and frozen dessert, bakery products, especially the ones that are not homemade, like the muffins and cakes that you get commercially, fast foods like French fries and burgers, frozen entrees, and processed deli meats. These are all things that are quite processed. Pardon me. Let's take a sip of my tea there. Just thinking about it made me choke. So, sometimes you can't avoid all of these things. So you can try to eat them less often or eat them in smaller amounts or try starting to replace them with healthier options. And, don't keep them at home. If you have kids or grandkids around, those things shouldn't be in the cabinets because kids are incredibly psychic about where those things are. And if you're eating those things, they're going to notice. They will hunt them down. So you're going to stock your kitchen with healthier things, right? Pardon me. Like nuts or fruit or cut up vegetables or, hard-boiled eggs cooked up and ready, whatever you've got that is on the healthier side, even leftovers, reprocessing your leftovers into something that can be easily snacked upon. So, the first step for cutting those things out, just start looking at ingredient lists on products before you buy them. If you can even especially make healthier snack choices just to start with, you can eliminate a lot of the bad sugars and fats that are consumed in such high quantities. So go through your pantry, have a good look at those kinds of ingredients and get those processed foods out of your house. A lot of the time, it takes a little bit of doing to do that, especially if you're used to having certain things in the food and you don't even think about them as being processed. But if you can, that is a good starting point. So if you're eliminating those, sometimes kids will take a little bit of time to adjust. According to the Food Addiction Research Education Society, those that are cutting processed foods from your diet can actually experience quite a bit of temporary uneasiness. So headaches, anxiety, anger, sadness, even depressive symptoms, and those can last anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. So just be prepared that that might just be an adjustment period. And the fact that your body kind of has to find a way to detox all those things is another reason why we need to eliminate processed foods. There's lots of processed foods that we're introducing basically exogenous toxins that are things that we have to get rid of. We don't have a choice. We can't use them. Now, I wanted to also take a look at what is the ideal. So this is the average ideal plate. This is the ideal proportions for the diets of the healthiest people in the world that have the best longevity. So you can see here that ideally you're going to have a half a plate of non-starchy vegetation, a quarter plate of your proteins and fats, so your nuts and your eggs and your meats fit in there, and your oils, 11% starchy vegetables and grain, 11% fruits, and a percentage point of salts and seaweeds, and a percentage point of something fermented for microbiome support. So it's not uncommon for parents to kind of freak out when they see these ideal proportions because it's often very different than how most people eat. And it's especially different than what you expect to see at a restaurant. But trust me, you can start to make moves towards the ideal. What people are most shocked about is usually the starchy veg and grain category here. But the truth is most human beings actually don't do that well, entirely undercutting their diet with rice and wheat, or any of the other starches and pulses. It's really very, very carb heavy what we do in Canada, and it actually isn't the healthiest diet. So it's worth showing your family how to eat like this from the beginning. Now, of course, the first question I often get is like, this is what my kid is going to do when you when you try and put that over on them. So especially with vegetables, like people will say, my kids eat no vegetables now. How am I going to get them to eat that many? And I think really like kids sometimes do have a little bit of a thing against vegetables, but there's a couple of different reasons why. I mean, first of all, really, a lot of it has to do with conditioning and familiarity. So they will not eat things that you don't. So just like in those studies where pregnancy had such a big impact on their capacity to enjoy certain tastes and flavors, um, they need exposure at some point. So the whole premise of McDonald's was based on familiarity. People thought the guy who invented McDonald's was crazy in the beginning because in essence, they said that, well, nobody wants to go to a new place and eat the same thing. Well, it turns out everybody wants to go to a new place and eat the same thing. They want to see all these things that they are familiar with, and they know exactly what to expect. When I was little, I remember going skiing once with my family, and we had stopped at, I think it was a Smitty's in Banff. I think there used to be one on the main drag. And I ordered pancakes. And when I got these pancakes, I would not eat them. They were some sort of weird buttermilk fake pancake mix that they had made, that they used to make pancakes with at Smitty's. I was used to pancakes made out of real things in my mother's kitchen. I'd never tasted such a weird pancake in my life. And actually it was and we're going to talk about this other part in just a second, but my parents had a lot of messaging around how that was totally unacceptable. I should just eat the horrible fake pancakes and like it, and also like the fake syrup that went with it. So for years after that, actually for most of my life until adulthood, I never ordered another pancake in a restaurant again. That's the power of familiarity. So I too am subject to that. And we're all programmed to also, I think, as a group, really like rare tastes in nature. So we like sweet and fat and high calorie. And that's because it's related to how people need to seasonally, historically, be putting on weight in case in the winter food was more scarce. So that does still have an influence somewhat because you're still got the exact same genes or variations on those as what ancestors had thousands of years ago. But I think, like I said, another big part of it is how we talk to our kids about food. My father grew up in the war years, Second World War years, where you ate what you got and that was that. I grew up in the eat it because children are starving in Ethiopia years. And it really took me until adulthood to figure out that I would force myself to stuff food down based on that inner messaging, even when I didn't realize I was doing it. In fact, one time when I was in med school, I was at a study dinner party eating like this huge salad. And I was trying to study with my friends and eat this humongous thing. And I kept trying to like force myself to eat it all, realizing kind of in the middle of it, what am I doing? I can't eat this much salad. And realizing it was all of that old messaging that I had growing up about, you're supposed to eat this because, it's a waste or whatever it is. We all use words to try to force our kids to eat, and we end up usually creating immediate resistance. So table talk is a really serious issue. And I want to just show you a couple of the things that we just tend to do as a group. So these are a couple of main categories of types of table talk. So the first one is instructive. So we say to children, do this, use your fork, stop using your hands. We're very like, this is what you should be doing. Or we will say corrective things. So don't do that. So don't talk with your mouth full. Don't throw those on the floor. Whatever it is that we're telling our kids. We sometimes praise kids. Oh, good job. I'm so proud of you. Way to go, eating your vegetables. We can be very conditional about it. So if you do X, then Y will be possible. So eat 2 more bites and then you can do whatever. We try and oblige them to eat. So we'll say, you have to eat. Just try 1 bite. Don't waste it. I worked hard making that, eat some of it. You could also be expectant with your kids. So this is how or what you should feel, or how you should feel if you tried. This is how you felt before, so we try and convince them by saying, you used to do this or you have done this, so why aren't you doing it now? And then we also do things like being appreciative. Thank you for how you're eating. Thank you for tasting it. And we also do closed-end questions where there's just a simple yes or no response. So did you try that? Are you going to drink that? Are you going to eat that? So you might be able to see from this chart things that you've historically communicated with your kids or grandkids about food. So when kids are small, we're really better at being with them and attending to them and letting them have a little bit more freedom without any requirements to eat, especially when they're really little. We let them guide the process and we have more patience for no table manners. But when they start to be able to talk, we often immediately shift into these adult requirements for all these rules and social norms and expectations, and we make food a battlefield. And, in summary, this is what this table talk is saying. You have a lot to learn about eating. You're doing it all wrong. You're bad at eating. If you just eat this, then you can have something better. You don't deserve something better because you didn't eat the thing you should have eaten. You can't be trusted to decide things about food that are in your own best interest. You try, but somehow you just keep falling short. Shame on you for not doing a better job with eating. Just follow the plan and stick with the rules, and that makes you good and worthy. Now, what does that remind you of? I can tell you what that should remind you of. A lot of the time, that reminds me of inner self-talk that I hear people saying to themselves about food in my office in their adulthood. So we're communicating those things to children, and we're not having an investigative, curious experience about food and trying new things. We're having like this external talk with ourselves, but at our children. And all of that old food messaging gets carried forward, and it really doesn't work. If you were in a restaurant with somebody and somebody said to you, just try 1 bite and don't waste that, how would you respond to that? You probably would be angry, and you probably, just to spite them, might not even eat it anymore, right? If somebody said, oh, well, if you just eat 2 more bites of that, then you can do this. You would be very combative, just like children can be. So I would suggest that you can do this a little bit differently. No closed-ended questions. You just kill the zest for eating, but doing things more like, what do you notice about this food? Or tell me about this food for you. And just really let your kids know that their experience of the food actually matters. So you're cultivating curiosity and connection, and you're modeling eating behavior. So you're showing them, not telling them. So you share your experience while you eat. Wow, this food is tangy. Or, could start an origin of the food conversation. How many varieties of this food are there that we can name? And instead of criticizing that they didn't eat something, say, well, tell me about this omelet for you, or whatever it is. And let them actually talk about what worked and what didn't work for them. And like I said, also feel into how you feel when I'm describing these new ways, because your resistance will be a really good indicator of what you're dying on a hill for at the dinner table. So I'm sure there are meals that you've produced that you could barely eat, never mind your children, right? So try and cultivate senses around it. So sight and smell and touch and sound. So how was that for you? What did you notice? What happened in your eyes? What was the flavor of it? And illustrate using adjectives other than good and bad, right? So what was that? Juicy, spicy, garlicky, lemony, gooey, sticky, fizzy, slurpy. You got to use different words instead of letting yourself and children just make something in the good and bad pile. It's oversimplification. And in fact, a lot of the time, if you ask for more details, you'll kind of get a sense of things that maybe they've never tasted before, or they never tasted in a food before, that they just need some time to kind of experiment with. You can also ask them, what could we add to it that would help it? Like, what's one thing that would help this food? So, and then you could tell them, okay, so the add-ons we have right now are like mustard, or this herb, or coconut flakes, or this little bit of sauce, or something like that. It depends on the kid what they might even suggest to you, and they might try things that are perfectly acceptable to them and make that thing acceptable to you that you would never put together in a million years. So involve them. If there's a part of their lunch that always comes home, get them to pack that part of their lunch. So if it's the veggies, as an example, get them to pack that little veggie part in their lunch. If they pack it, they chose it and they packed it, they're more likely to eat it. Let them help shop for things like vegetables, explore new things together, and you try new things. There's lots of parents that never try new things, and then they wonder why their kids don't. And then they're like, wow, that's terrible. That person won't even try it. So give it a whirl. And making the shift from that, that can take a lot of support. So get the whole family on board, try and make dietary shifts together. It's really beneficial for everybody, and that positive reinforcement is really crucial to your child's success, regardless of how old they are. So I wanted to share a couple of potential options that come that I could think of that might be useful for exploration purposes, because I think as a parent, it's really important that you do experiment yourself with different foods and different taste textures, any of those things. So first of all, cookbooks are your friends. Now, you might not feel like you're the best cook on the planet, and that's okay. But just learning different combinations of things can be amazing. Just even looking at this plate here on this picture, I mean, it's just mostly vegetables with some chicken on it, but it looks so appealing. There's just something amazing about that. Sometimes it's the way things are cut up. Sometimes it's the way you're combining things together. So, like borrow from cookbooks. I have this amazing cookbook as an example. It's not even a cookbook because you don't even cook it. It's like a salad book. I think it's actually just called Salads. And every single page is a different combination of things to make a salad out of. Kids, if they think salad is only one thing, which most adults think salad is only one thing, with a little bit of permutation, if you just teach kids, look, we have a whole full book of different things that we can put together that will constitute a salad. Guaranteed, they're going to find ones in there that you're like, that you might not have chosen, but they're going to choose. I think you can also really learn from some of the paleo cookbooks out there. I don't espouse the full paleo diet, as you can see from my ideal chart there from, best longevity and health diets. But some of the paleo cookbooks are absolutely great at putting out different vegetable combinations that you might not have thought of, or using more vegetable and less starch. Well, obviously in paleo, they try and get rid of all grains. So just gives a lot more ideas about how do you put vegetables on that plate. Getting a spiralizer and learning how to make like zucchini noodles, it takes like literally 3 minutes to do it. You can buy them, of course, but you can also just make them. And make fun shapes and things for kids and for your own entertainment. I spiralize the living daylights out of many things. And it's entertaining. It kind of makes different crunch. It makes different textures on the plate. And there's some like harder vegetables that you can use in the spiralizer raw that make them very palatable, like beets is a great example, raw beet. You can also look at some of the Whole30 approaches. So how do you put like whole foods into your diet? And again, little cookbooks. So if you are at all inclined and you have children, finding new and inventive ways of testing things for yourself and your kids is super important. Now, you're also going to want to be prepared for snacks, especially when you're making transitions. So, here we're showing apple chips. So those are just dehydrated apple slices. They look super fancy and kids love them, but they are basically whole food renditions of a snack, right? Easy. If your kids like the crunchy stuff, dehydrate stuff for them. It's really quite easy. A dehydrator overnight will make the most beautiful banana chips ever. And banana chips, like you get in the store, have to be treated like with a whole bunch of things so they don't discolor. But the reality is, if you make that with lemon juice in your own dehydrator, they are way tastier and they don't have that weird powdery texture to them because they have to put whatever stuff on them to keep them like from going brown. And they don't stay around in your house long enough to go brown because they're so much tastier. So be prepared for some of that. And there are full books even on snacks, but you just have to be a bit careful because ideally you wouldn't have kids grazing all day. You eat them, they eat proper meals with the odd snack that you can clearly see when they need one at different ages. Now, when you manage to do that, and after your body's clearing out all of those things, most children and parents feel better. And you might lose some weight. You could even start to feel calmer because you're not constantly up and down in your blood sugar all the time. You could have less anxiety and sleep better. If you're prone to headaches, you probably will get some relief there too. It also can boost the immune system when there's not too much of that overload going in. So, and every day that you and your child eats healthier, you reduce the risk of all sorts of the diseases of civilization. So it's really important to try this and to make the effort for yourself and for your family. So I hope that gives you a couple of ideas about what you can do. Certainly, eating is a challenge for all of us, I think. And nowhere is that more evident than with your kids. But, like I said, exposure can have some beautiful pieces. I'll tell you one more story. And that is that when my son was probably about, I'm going to say 5, we sat down and watched Master Chef on Netflix. And I don't know if you've seen that, but it's, or no, sorry, it was Chef's Table. It was basically showing restaurants around the world that pretty much had like farm to table sorts of arrangements and all the special things that they made, amazing things that they made in these restaurants. And we were watching this one that was on a French chef that was literally farm to table. The restaurant or owned the farm and was the chef at the restaurant. And he watched this show with me for about 20 minutes. And then he asked me to pause. And so I paused it thinking he was like going to the bathroom or something. And then all I heard was chopping sounds coming from the kitchen. And he spent about, I would say 20 minutes in the kitchen after having watched 20 minutes of this show, finding things in the fridge, the spice rack. And he made all of these little dishes of things that he found in the fridge. And then literally brought it out and served it on the table so that we could continue to watch the show. But he literally put cinnamon and sugar together on little fruits and enrichment in the plate. So, like that was just exposing him to not even my cooking, but the cooking of somebody that was like elevated, and who was a master at cooking at his own restaurant. So these are the things that if you expose your kids to them, you'd be surprised at what they pick up. And to this day, my son does some pretty amazing things in the kitchen for me and for our family. So we have a couple of, or I think we have one more lecture in the series for the Alleviate webinar series this year. So we have one more in May coming up, and that's about avoiding EMF dangers. This is the time of year where I start to make the plans for as we go forward for the next year. So if you have ideas or something that you'd really like to see, please let me know. I do love to hear about the topics that you're interested in. And unfortunately, this was the last of the Helping Doctor Moms for this year. So stay tuned for the next lineup for next year. I hope to see you there. So thank you so much for showing up and coming here to learn. I'm super glad to see you. And if you have time for questions or feedback, let me know if you have any questions. I don't see any questions in the question box and not too much in the chat. So I guess this is good night. I hope you all are going to have a wonderful time trying to feed your kids new things. All right, take care. Have a great night.
Thanks for watching. I love to connect to my patient community to inform and inspire, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future. Don't forget to check out helpingdrmom.com for more webinars and events.